Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Glick. If this is your first time joining us, each week when you tune in, you will hear one of two different types of shows. Sometimes when you tune in, you're going to hear an interview style show where we have on someone associated with the land development industry. We talk about their origin story, and then we dig into some other land development related topics. Other times when you tune in, you're going to hear industry news. That's where we pull up a few different headlines and we talk about what it means for the industry. And today we have our first industry news episode of 2025. And joining me, as always, is Charles Covey. Charles, how's it going?
Hey, Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. So I think our last industry news episode, which wasn't even really industry news specifically, aired on the last day of 2024. So yeah, we're getting together for the first time in 2025. And we've got some really good articles to dig into here today. Just a lot of stuff going on and new things that are happening, including like the California wildfires that are a big talk right now. Not only just the devastation that's been happening for all of the people that have been involved, and just seeing some of those images is just it's just amazing seeing what Mother Nature can do. And so anyway, we'll get into that here in a second. Where we're going to start though is we're going to start with an article from CNBC, and we're going to dig into some more talk around data centers. So this article comes to us, as I said, from CNBC, and the headline reads, "Only 20% of the current capacity is AI. Think how AI will grow." Now, this one is actually a video that we're going to play here. So rather than me reading through the article, we're going to listen to a quick video, and then we will react.
We kind of laid out some of the things going on in the sector, a lot of boom when it comes to data centers, but what's this turning point you're talking about?
Well, the turning point at a macro level is what we talked about last time, being in the formation stage, which was let's get through the election, let's really see what the Fed is going to do. And those 2 points of clarity have really helped market psychology. We're seeing a lot more buyers at the table, and we're seeing the fear of uncertainty shift to the fear of missing out. A lot of our clients are buying all cash transactions because the prices have come down 20 to 30%.
Well, you're taking the words out of my mouth. The prices are considerably lower, so of course more people are coming to the table, right?
And compared to other investments, I mean, look at the equities market, obviously at very high valuations.
Right.
Real estate becomes a compelling case, and the election outcome really points to more favorable paths ahead, especially on tax treatment, which commercial real estate has many of.
I would imagine. But again, the valuations of the real estate are also lower, so they're more attractive compared to equities, which are trading at highs, in all fairness.
Yes.
Let's talk about data centers. We're going to have a guest later who's talking about a data center play. We just had a guest talking about private equity. A lot of private equity names are in the data center space. What's going on there when it comes to data center and the build out? What are you seeing?
Great example of how real estate morphs along with the economy. This is a real estate accommodation of a kind of a wave of technology, of course, that is now morphing from the cloud and sort of server farms of a few years ago to AI. Only 20% of the current capacity is AI oriented, and just think about how much AI is going to grow. The industry has doubled in the last 4 years, but it's a scarce product, and it's a very specialized product. Developers will build it. The companies that need it will come use it for long-term leases, which is attractive to both, if you can get the power, and if you can get the local municipality to actually approve and support the development of these properties. They're very specialized.
Okay. I was talking to a couple stock traders just about, these alternative asset managers and data centers and this whole trade, like how do you play it? And one thing that I can't figure out when it comes to commercial real estate, separate from the equities, how does the data center thing impact commercial real estate? Because that's generally huddled near urban centers, and data centers are usually built in kind of the middle of nowhere where power is a lot cheaper. So is there really a big influence on the valuations and the price of commercial real estate, even with this build out?
Not at a macro level. This is a very limited. There's only 6,000 properties across the U.S. Even if you double, triple, or quadruple that, it's not going to become a major part of the macro commercial real estate kind of a wave or impact on the economy. But it is a niche play that can't be ignored.
Okay, but it's more of a construction play. Because
it is a construction play. From a real estate perspective, it's a land and construction and long-term leases.
So this is a topic that we've obviously been talking about over the last, for several weeks now, just talking about data centers and some of the opportunities that are there, especially with AI and the increase there. And I'm not sure, Charles. What do you think of this? Anything in what was said here? Now, I should mention that this particular video actually aired back in around the middle of December, so it was a little before the new year when this aired. But I think a lot of the information was after the election. It was after the Fed's decision to cut rates again, and so there's some, I guess, interesting information inside here just around the overall, from his perspective, the overall scope or macro scope, as he says, of how many, I guess, I don't know if you'd call them deals or properties that are out there that could potentially house data centers. I guess, what are your thoughts?
I love the data center market. So I've been learning a lot about this in the last year. So there's a parcel that we've been working to put a data center on, and there's a lot of nuances to it. Not every site works. And so what we have seen is that, getting the power is challenging. Getting the right fiber also challenging. Some municipalities are just very much, hey, we don't want this. Others are like, yes, please, bring as much as you can. So that's been a fascinating scenario to watch play out. There are the areas that have all of these nuanced elements. So they got like redundant power, 2, 3 power sources crossing, great fiber in the same area. Like when those things happen, the land valuation goes completely nuts because they can put, 5 million square feet of data center here or even more. Like, so there's some areas in Virginia outside of DC that are a really good example. And they've just gone crazy with the data centers here because they have all of those elements. And it's to the point where the city's like, okay, that's it, no more. We don't want any more of this stuff. But they're pushing even the capacity of the power in those areas. Now there's a bunch of stuff happening in Texas with some nuclear power and some things we talked about that the governor is really wanting to dive into. So I think there may be some ways to co-locate, and what we're seeing now is co-locating data centers near, like right next to the power supply, right, getting them right next to a power plant where you got all the power you need right there. And I think that's probably the long-term play, just because getting all those elements there and the power is the huge deal. So with some nuclear, we may get some co-location of power generation and large, like, million square feet data centers at the same time. So I love the space. I think it's fascinating. Just like anything else in real estate, the pendulum will swing too far, right? We always see this happen. You go to downtown Austin. I love to use this example, but you go to downtown Austin and it's the pendulum swung too far with high-rise residential, right? And there's too much of it, and now they are in deep shit, and the bank's going to get some of them. But this is how it goes. It's just how things happen. Nobody ever hits this stuff right, dead on the mark of exactly how much we need in a market. And so the data center thing is very hot. There's billions and billions, maybe even $1 trillion dumping into it. And so it'll swing too far, and we'll have too much, most likely. But the AI thing is gonna really change how we analyze data center usage. But at the same time, we're thinking about data center usage based on what we need today. Okay, so you look at these multiple factors. Data center usage goes up because AI increases, but you've got NVIDIA and some of these other ones that are creating new chips that are much more powerful, that can operate on a smaller footprint. So, in theory, just play outside the box thinking here. In theory, you have all this data center built out, then you get chips that are now capable of 10x the capability. Well, now you need 10 times less space. So there's a bunch of factors like that, and how that plays out. There's so many nuances and variables, but I love the data center space, and it's booming, and it's going to continue to do so for a while. And we'll see. It may get overbuilt at some point.
Yeah, I was wondering, one of the things I had written down here, I was going to ask you about this one was, do you think the data center asset class is something that all developers should consider, or is it pretty niche to the point where it's going to end up having a lot of people jumping into it, and then it's going to get overdeveloped, and there's going to be too many people playing in that space? Because some of the benefits, and I don't think he mentioned it in this video, but usually data center tenants are, very long-term tenants, right? So they're signing very long-term, which is a good
20 year,
thing.
30 year, long-term, yeah.
Good thing for investors there. But do you think from a development standpoint that it's is it very niche, or is it basically just another development project as long as the utilities are accessible in there?
Well, I think to everybody that's listening to the podcast, everybody's touching land in some way, right? Whether we're doing residential or multifamily or commercial. And so you should just have that in the back of your mind. When you see a parcel that is well suited for solar or well suited for data center, it's going to have that convergence of all the things that are necessary. You should definitely be forward thinking and opportunistic. When you see one of those things happen, okay, you happen to know a guy that wants to sell his property, and there's two power lines crossing, and there's good fiber in the area, and there's no development issues, or it's in the ETJ, or whatever the reasons are, you're like, okay, that could be a good data center. Be opportunistic, be thoughtful about that, because right now there's an opportunity to, get those properties under contract, entitle it, and flip it to somebody else, even if you don't want to do the development yourself. But it's just an opportunity you should be aware of. And if you don't want to do it, call me. I'll help you out. But those opportunities are going to be there. I think you should just be forward thinking and always kind of have that in the back of your mind. Hey, this is a good solar play. Hey, this is a good data center play. Even if that's not your specialty, there's somebody else that definitely wants that. There's a way for you to monetize it.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the second article. This one comes to us from CRE Daily. The headline reads, "Logistics firms brace for impact of potential Mexican tariffs." So reading from the article, the past few years have seen a surge in logistics investments in warehouses, trucking terminals, and rail yards across the U.S. Mexico border. Firms like C.H. Robinson, Kuhn, plus Nagel, and Prologis have expanded operations in anticipation of more manufacturing activity in Mexico, a trend driven largely by companies moving production closer to the U.S. called nearshoring. This isn't just about tariffs, said Joachim Goller, Senior VP of North America Road Logistics at Kuhn and Nagel. In 2023, a landmark $31 billion merger between Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern created a new transnational freight railroad connecting Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. Meanwhile, companies like Schneider and XPO Logistics have expanded their trucking services, while Ryder and Prologis have committed to investing more in warehousing on both sides of the border. President-elect Trump has already threatened a 25% tariff on imports from Mexico and Canada if the countries don't take stronger action on issues like drug trafficking and immigration. However, logistics operators have largely brushed off the risk, with many noting that tariffs are not a new issue and they don't foresee any tariffs really derailing the long-term growth of cross-border trade. In response to the growing demand for cross-border trade, the Mexican government has committed $2.7 billion to expand the port of Manzanillo, aiming to double its capacity by 2030. These investments reveal that Mexico's government is also betting on continued cross-border trade with the U.S. despite the uncertain political climate. Jason Miller, a logistics expert at Michigan State University, also pointed out that while tariffs might make other regions more appealing for manufacturing, the advantages of labor costs and proximity to the U.S. will keep Mexico an attractive destination for production. So this is another topic we've covered multiple times, especially as Trump has come out and made some of the comments that he's made. What are your thoughts on this one, Charles?
Well, we need Mexico. There's no question about that. So post-COVID, the nearshoring picked up pretty dramatically, and it was already happening. Major manufacturers were realizing, we've got to be closer to our source. This whole thing of putting stuff on a boat from China is becoming problematic. Right, the time frame is a problem. Like in COVID, we just had so many issues, and stuff was just like, you saw the pictures of the boats, just like hundreds of giant ships parked in the bay, and they couldn't get stuff in, and you get your dock workers strike, and you got a disaster, or you get pirates and pirates off the coast of somewhere take over a boat. It's like all these. There's so many different things that happen, and so nearshoring is really it's working because. Think about China in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. It was coming up as a superpower in the production realm. And we're coming from a third world country, improving the country. Everybody's moving from the farms into the cities. The cities are growing crazy rates, and they got all these entrepreneurs are making crazy money. Building all these plants and producing stuff that they could do cheaper than anybody else. And the process always goes the same way. As this happens, and as you build infrastructure, the costs of doing business go up in these areas. And so it costs more to make things in China than it did 20 years ago. And peak China was probably 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And so, peak China, meaning the best value for what they could do and sell to us. And now that's starting to trend down. Now you've got other developing countries like India and Mexico that can do things more economically, because in Mexico's case, they could cost more, but the freight is less to get it here, right? They can put it on rail, so it's easier in the logistics. And then India, of course, is less developed, and so they don't have that infrastructure. They don't have all those things that raise costs. and labor costs obviously are lower, and so they can still make things pretty cheaply. But China is maybe third or fourth on that list of most economical producers of stuff. And so as that happens, producers, whether they're U.S. companies that are producing elsewhere, whether they're Chinese companies producing in China and shipping it here, they're just seeing this problem. They're realizing, hey, we're less price competitive. Now you throw some tariffs on there, and this is a whole different ballgame. And so I think most companies are realizing nearshoring plays out better for them for the most part. They would see, and they're right, that it's going to be easier to work with Mexico to U.S. or Canada to U.S. than it will be from anywhere else on the planet. And that makes total sense, and we should allow that to be the case. So having things close by with our allies is definitely the way to go. If we have some type of conflict with a Russia-China conglomerate, if they decide to create some geopolitical firestorm, now you can't get all your stuff. Like, that seems to be a problem, right? And the likelihood of us going to war with Mexico is pretty low. So I think that it's just very simple. We don't have to complicate this. It's just like, it makes more sense, and it's less complex in every way to do things in Mexico versus other places on the planet. And it's pretty straightforward. I think we're going to continue to see the nearshoring happen. Every major company is doing this, automakers, everybody. So I think that there was some threats from Trump, like, hey, if you don't get your drug cartels under control, we're going to throw a 25% tariff. There's no way. I mean, it's not realistic for that to happen. And I think they'll negotiate, right? But Trump does have a tremendous amount of power, because what is it? Almost $500 billion a year that come across from Mexico to the U.S. So we're talking about major. It is their economy. Mm-hmm. So we do carry a pretty big stick there. So we'll see what happens with the drug stuff. But my guess is that we're still going to continue to maintain a very, very strong trading relationship with Mexico.
All right, so something that I didn't necessarily have in the plans for today, but it's somewhat related to this, or Trump's comments over the last I don't know if it's been the last week or week and a half or whatever, are around Canada, Panama Canal, and Greenland.
Oh, I love this. I am enjoying the heck out of these conversations. Think about this. What if we go on a rampage and acquire new territory? That hasn't happened. When was the last time a country did that? It's at scale anyway.
Right.
You go back to the 1800s, 1700s. Everybody was doing this, right? It was just like, all these European superpowers were clamoring for territory and conquering everything they could. And I think Trump's not scared of it. So, I think Canada will have to be more than one state. It'll have to be 5 or 6 states. But I don't think the Canadians are very opposed to it at this point. At least the Canadians that I've talked to recently. I was on a flight coming back from somewhere, and I had to get rerouted, and I'm in Montreal of all places. And, just having conversations with people, and they are sick and tired of their regime. They think it is some crap, and they're glad that their prime minister is out and somebody else is coming in, and they're definitely the pendulum there will swing much more conservative than it has been. They're just fed up with it. So I think it's a very interesting scenario. I don't know. I just think it would be so cool if in the next 4 or 5 years, the U.S. grabs a bunch of territory. I'm all about the U.S. maintaining, its role as the man internationally. So
yeah,
I'm down for it.
Well, when I look at this, I think of it in a couple different ways. So we obviously have this, Trump and the U.S. has this, feud with China and China. And so I think there's this thought of, well, what are there concerns that China could, get, I don't know, they could do something where they come in and they're a bigger part of Canada, because I think there's some of that going on already.
Well, China's doing this everywhere. You look at what they've done across the African continent. It's unbelievable what they've been able to do with dollars and going in to build infrastructure. They're doing it in Eastern Europe as well. And they're going in and funding infrastructure, and they're trying to work on this. I think they're involved with some stuff in Panama. It's like this is not good, right? The U.S. needs to take a much more proactive role in this.
Yeah, and I think again, not knowing what's going to happen with any of this and what he's talking about, but I do think there's a natural resources play here as well that can come into this, which will have a direct impact on our industry for sure. Because you're talking about Canada and some of the like the logging and stuff up there and other resources. Greenland. I mean, Greenland is one of those things where I don't know what's underneath. I don't know what's there and what's available, but I don't think it's very it's been tapped into much yet. So there's probably a natural resources play for Greenland.
My guess is that there's always an agenda, right?
Right.
So the agenda is guised as, hey, for national security, for a jumping off point to Europe and other places, we need Greenland. And maybe that's true. Or maybe there's something much deeper to this where it's like, hey, the largest lithium deposit on the planet is in Greenland. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe it's full of oil. Who knows? But somebody probably knows, or has a good idea. So there may be some other much larger play here that we don't know about. But I think it's going to be freaking fascinating to watch this play out.
Yeah, well, I imagine we're going to have an article on this at some point in the coming
for sure.
in the coming weeks, because something's going to be happening.
Sure.
Yeah, we're only a couple of weeks away from inauguration, so there's going to be we'll start to see how some of this stuff is going to play out.
Well, just think about this for a second. All the different things that are going on around us right now. If you would have said, I mean, because back in October and all through the fall, we're like, hey, this is a big election cycle. It's a big year, a lot of stuff happening. But if you would have told me all the stuff that is now happening, I would not have believed you. I would have been like, you are full of crap. There's no way that's all happening. We're talking about taking new territory and, all the disasters and the shootings. And it's like, there's some pretty wild stuff going on. So this is we've said this before, but a fascinating time to be alive, and even more fascinating today than it was 6 months ago.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, I thought that was something interesting to bring up since we're on the topic of just, how we work with our neighboring countries, and that's on the table and something that's been talked about. So
the geopolitical element, and I would advise everybody listening to pay attention to what's going on, because I think in the grand scheme of our nation over the hundreds of years that we've been here, we're still pretty young, but this is big. This is a very interesting, fascinating, and impactful geopolitical landscape. And the next 4 years are going to play out, I'm predicting, a lot of things that impact our nation and us and our families for the next hundreds of years. So I would say spend a little bit extra time, pay attention, definitely ask questions, definitely beware of some fake news. But there's a lot to know about, and I think it's going to impact us and what we do pretty dramatically.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our third and final headline here. This one comes to us from Fox Business. Headline reads, natural disasters are worsening America's housing affordability crisis, experts warn. So this one is another video. So we're going to go ahead and play this video from Fox Business, and then we will react.
Welcome back. The deadly Los Angeles wildfires could stand to be the costliest in U.S. history. Insured losses expected to exceed $20 billion, according to J.P. Morgan. AccuWeather is predicting the economic losses could rise to a staggering $57 billion. More than 10,000 buildings have now been destroyed, at least 5,300 damaged in the Pacific Palisades neighborhood alone. That fire being called one of the most destructive natural disasters in city history, burning up nearly 20,000 acres. That's about the size of New York City. New devastating video shows entire blocks of homes turned to rubble. President-elect Donald Trump responded yesterday.
I've never seen anything like that, devastation. And we're talking about homes that cost $200, $300, $400 million. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. People that, and very influential people worldwide. I don't know that they ever go back either, because, they weren't happy with California. They weren't happy with Gavin Newsom. They weren't happy with their whole lifestyle there, with the crime being out of control, all the other problems. They were not happy. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether or not they're going to build, or whether somebody else is going to build and build a much lesser home.
Joining me now is Romer DeBoss. He's managing partner, Pierre DeBoss. Pierre, great to talk with you. Thanks very much for being here. How would you assess this situation? How long would it take for the Pacific Palisades real estate market to rebuild, in your view?
Thanks, Maria. It's great to see you. It's going to take several years, and really the biggest question that the homeowners are going to have to face are, what's their insurance coverage? You know, if I had to estimate, I would say roughly 50% of homeowners in the California region do not have adequate insurance to rebuild their homes at full cost. So if you're in a situation where your insurance coverage is only giving you, say, 50% to 2/3, do you have the liquidity to complete the completion, or are you going to really move elsewhere and just take the insurance proceeds? And what happens to the lending institution that has a mortgage on that property? So it is several years until we have the answer to this, and a majority of people in that area, unfortunately, you know, our prayers are with them for what they're going through. But economically speaking, you know, it's going to continue to be an unfortunate story.
Well, I mean, there will be an immediate federal response. The Small Business Association disaster loans to those impacted by these wildfires. But Cheryl, the homeowners are looking to the state for help. Jump in here.
Well, because so California has, it's called FAIR, and FAIR is the backup, insurance program. But that, correct me if I'm wrong, Pierre, but that is, there's no way that all of these claims, if they go to FAIR, can possibly be covered. FAIR is going to be underwater in 3 days when these claims start to get filed. Isn't that correct?
There is no way FAIR has the budget adequate enough to replace all the insurance companies in this region. There's absolutely no way. And that's the problem, is that, you know, how are we going to hold insurance companies accountable to provide fair coverage to the consumer? And the government's not going to be able to step in and to meet the delta entirely. It's going to be virtually impossible. I don't even think FEMA is funded adequately for something like that.
Well, that's right, because the next step will be from a federal level, will be the enactment of disaster legislation, not just to pay for the rebuilding of infrastructure, but also to pay for emergency housing and replenish FEMA. FEMA is out of money, which we learned just last year, that it's not sufficient to actually handle what we're talking about. 1,600 Pacific Palisades homeowners lost their property insurance last April after the State Farm canceled thousands of policies across the state. So why did that happen, Pierre? Tell us about the challenges that these specific homeowners will face as they try to rebuild.
Well, if you look back in the last couple of years, we've had a tremendous uptick of natural disasters in America. It's really unfortunate when you look at Hawaii and the Sun Belt. Insurance companies saw this. Insurance companies want to mitigate risk. And what's the easiest way for them to mitigate risk? To exit high-risk markets. And it's really a shame, because it is impossible already today to find, prior to this, horrible event, to find insurance in these areas. What's going to happen 6 months from now? These areas will be completely uninsurable. And what does that mean? That means you cannot transact. Banks will not lend on a home that doesn't have insurance. And I don't know, any homeowner would want to pursue an investment without having adequate insurance. So these regions will be deemed to become completely uninsurable at some point.
It's so heartbreaking to think of those people who acquired their home through inheritance. Right? They inherited this incredibly beautiful home and have been living there, and now the home is burned to the ground and everything in it is gone.
That's right.
What do they do?
And Maria, the sad part is most homeowners don't know what insurance that they have. In reality, your average homeowner who buys a home is looking for the lowest cost insurance. They're not really going through a policy to see what's my full replacement coverage. So a lot of these homeowners, especially the ones who've inherited these homes, usually have a less vested interest even, there's no chance that they have insurance to fully rebuild these homes. There's no chance whatsoever.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, there are new California rules that are aiming to increase coverage by requiring insurers to underwrite a minimum percentage of policies in dangerous areas based on their state market share. Companies can raise premiums in exchange to reflect future modeled risk and increased reinsurance costs. But rates will also likely increase statewide following the disaster, Pierre.
Well,
so if we're talking about higher rates, that's also going to underline this notion that inflation will get stoked.
Oh, this completely compounds affordability crisis in America.
Yeah.
When you look back now, we're taking, the last 4 or 5 years. You've had prices go up 50 to 100% in most of these areas. Wow. And you've had interest rates go from 2.7% to 7%. Now you're going to have insurance premiums go up roughly 4x from what they were a couple of years ago. You tell me how anybody is going to be able to enter the housing market.
Really, really disturbing. Pierre, thank you. We'll keep covering it and following it. We appreciate your time. Pierre DeBoss joining us.
So I guess the first thing this is obviously this is just devastating, and the video and images that you see of that area is just like, I mean, it's hard to even put into words what you're seeing. It just doesn't even seem real. And I think before diving into the actual impact that it's going to have on like just California and that area and the housing market and everything there. Something that this and the other natural disasters that we've had with the hurricanes over the last last fall that we saw, that just seems so apparent to me, is that we as a nation have our priorities like just completely flipped on their head. I mean, you see how much money we continue to send overseas, and just the hundreds of billions of dollars that we send to other foreign nations. And then when it comes to problems that we have in our own country and our own people who are suffering from, whether it's a natural disaster or just a number of different things, you see where our government comes in and they offer them loans. It's like, hey, here's a loan for you, or here's, it's like, how do we go and we give all this money to foreign nations, and then we come in and we don't even give the money. I was just actually looking this up. I had a hard time finding the actual FEMA budget on an annual basis. It seems like they have a certain amount of money they put into FEMA each year, but they do additional bills that will come in to approve some excess money when there are natural disasters that happen. Yeah. And you look at what happened last year, and from what I saw, it's like $31 billion is what they could spend in, I believe it was 2024. And you look at how much money was sent to foreign nations during that year, and it's just crazy how much it's flipped on its head. So I just wanted to put that out there because that's just driving me crazy. And I hope the new administration will get our priorities right as a country, and we start taking care of our own people here. And once we have our country in a spot where people are taken care of and we're doing great, and I'm not talking about building this crazy, government, this crazy country where the federal government is doing handouts and giving out all this money to a bunch of different people. I'm talking about when there's a time of need and we need some of that help to come in, we can figure out what that looks like, but we've got to stop sending our money overseas. So I'll get off my soapbox, but that's just something that is really driving me crazy.
Yeah, well, we see this the same way, and I would assume that the majority of our listeners agree with us. This is not in the best interest of our nation to take care of other people more than we take care of ourselves, and that just leaves a terrible taste in my mouth. Just even saying it. It's like, that sounds horrific. Like, why would we even do that? So yeah, embarrassing for sure. I would like to think that the incoming administration wouldn't allow that to happen, but who knows? I guess time will tell, and see if we can change that narrative, because it's not good. This California situation, my guess is that we're going to see a migration to places like Florida and Texas, only because the replacement cost, I just don't see the math working. Insurance companies are going to pay out 100% of the value on Zillow, whatever these things were trading at. Insurance companies aren't going to pay out that amount, and so then how are you going to replace it? With construction costs and what it's worth there. So, okay, at some point the lot will be worth something after they get everything cleaned up. And then you can take whatever you get from the insurance, let's say it's half, if you're lucky. And that actually is meaningful in Texas. You're fine. You can actually probably even improve your status. But trying to replace something there, like, construction is going to be such a disaster. You're not going to get a new house for 3 or 4 years, if not longer, if you can afford it. So it's like, are you going to do that? Or are you just going to go somewhere else? Well, hey, I can go buy a big ass house in Texas right now and be done and have money in the bank to live on. It just feels to me like that's what a lot of people will do. Now, that you're not going to replace the, the people that love the climate. It's beautiful. You can go mountains to beach within a very short period of time. And that's just a very unique and special thing. The climate is fantastic. But I think a lot of people are really going to consider hard going elsewhere. And there's also, if anywhere you look, you see a shift of the entertainment business to other places, just because of all the problems that we know to be happening in California and the taxes and all this other stuff. So a lot of people say that the entertainment industry is shifting to Las Vegas and moving from LA. This may really add a bunch of fuel to that fire. And then you've got the people that aren't in the entertainment industry that are like, do I really want to deal with all this now that I have this giant looming issue of trying to build a new house in California over the next 5 years and maybe getting it done? I mean, getting permits to build anything in California is a disaster. So it's like, do they really want to do that? Or they just want to move to Texas tomorrow and be done as soon as they get that insurance check? So my guess is we're going to see a lot of people moving. My guess is we're going to see industries moving This is a very transformational time in California.
Yeah, I had two thoughts I had on this. One was, are we going to see a bunch of institutional money come in and buy up some of these like city blocks of homes and basically just increase their portfolios for a lesser amount than they otherwise could have purchased some of this land? Something I've been thinking about. It seems
That's usually
probable.
how that goes.
Yeah, it seems like that's something that could happen. The other thing is, I wonder, and I don't hold my breath on this because I don't think we as human beings learn very quickly about mistakes that we make. But it just you see some of the issues and incompetence of some of the leaders in that area. And as this is
Right.
all unfolded, you start to see some of the things that they've done with cutting budget on, they know they have problems or they're at high risk for wildfires, and yet they massively cut the budget for, the fire department, which was I think that was a recent thing. So maybe it didn't lead into it. But then you also look at some of the, decisions that were made around the water that they have available to fight the fires, and the fact that a lot of the hydrants were empty. There was they couldn't use them to fight the fires in certain areas and stuff. And it's like, I think we as a nation, and this goes for everywhere, all of your local and everything, like we've got to hire people. We've got to get back to kind of the meritocracy, mindset around hiring people. Hire people who can do the job. Doesn't matter anything else. Like, can they do the job, and will they be good at doing the job? And if so, then they're probably right for the position. We've got to stop hiring people based on other characteristics that have nothing to do with somebody's ability to be good at, executing on a specific role that is meant to serve the people. And anyway, I just see a lot of lack of competence
True.
out there.
Well, I'll add some color to this. So my dad's was a 35-year firefighter. He just retired last year. So very intimately familiar with how these things run in cities. So the budget cutting, 20 million in the grand scheme of their budget, is probably not a large percentage. I don't know the percentage, but my guess is 20 million doesn't actually go that far. So I'm curious, kind of what that percentage actually was. But budget cutting for the fire department isn't a good thing. So we can agree on that. They've got their shorter staffs because, people that didn't do the vaccine in COVID got fired, and like there's some other stuff there. It's like, guys, this is really a bad look. Now the fire hydrant thing, though, that one I think is a little bit different problem. So nobody plans for 1,600 or whatever. No, that's actually 1,600 was how many insurance policies got canceled in Pacific Palisades. I don't know how many houses burned. But we can assume it's in the many hundreds or thousands. Well, so when you've got all of these things going off, and you've got every piece of equipment in the city hooked up to a hydrant, and you've got pump stations on fire, you got no power, you've got all this draw on the system, you got utilities burning. These houses burn to the ground, but nobody shut off the utilities. So you got utilities leaking, you got the pressure in the system dropped to zero, right? So there was no way there's water in the pipe, but you can't get it out of the pipe. Right? The water's in a pipe and it's connected to where it's supposed to be, but you can't get it because there's no way to pump it. So there's no way to maintain pressure in the system. So I don't know. Everybody's talking about the fire hydrants. I don't actually think that is a controllable problem when you have this big of a disaster. That's just a little color there, that I think is interesting. I think that particular talking point probably is not something that could have been fixed just because of the scale of the draw on the system, and they just couldn't maintain pressure in the system. That's my guess. Now, if we find somewhere that somebody intentionally, shut these off, or like there was somebody was intentionally shutting down pump stations, like that would be, that person should be absolutely, held accountable for that. But my guess is that it was just the larger draw on the system, and it was unable to sustain that kind of demand. But we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I guess one final thing here on this one is, do you think there will be any type of impact across the country to insurance premiums? I'm not 100% sure how the actuaries go and analyze, and I'm sure it's AI models and stuff now too that they're using, but to analyze, and do these insurance companies have to offset some of their risk in California with other states by increasing premiums where there's less risk of natural disasters? I assume this is going to be like a nationwide impact with what's happening.
For sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say certainly. Now you've got companies that are no longer carrying in California. So I think the problem isn't going to be as significant because a lot of companies have already said, hey, we got to wash our hands of this place. This is crazy. We can't deal with this. And a lot of people predicted this was going to happen. People have known for a long time. You get the Santa Ana winds coming in at the right rate. You get a conflagration happen in the wildland urban interface, and now you've got $100 million houses faced with wildfire, and they're just not ready for it. And sure enough, the damn thing happened. Now you look at all the factors that happened here, like very, very dry. The winds, I don't know if you saw the videos, the winds were so strong that it was blowing trucks over on the highway. Like there's videos of just all these semi trucks just laid over on their side. They're just literally blowing over going down the road. So the wind level was insane, and it just fueled this thing, just blowing fuel into this into the fires, and it was a once in a generation scenario for all of these things to coalesce. But people had predicted that this would happen, and the insurance companies knew this is a tremendous risk. So because it was limited, the insurance companies that were there, I think the impact nationally will be limited. Maybe insurance companies use this as a reason, because insurance premiums, as are going through the roof across the country. We've seen this everywhere. Like Florida's having this issue. We're even seeing it some in Texas. So, for policies to go up 10 or 20%, it's just kind of no big deal anymore, which is terrible.
Yeah, well, we'll see how this all plays out over the next couple of weeks. So the next time we hop on here and we do our next industry news episode, we'll continue to stay on top of this and what kind of impact this has, not only in California, but in other areas. Is there even more of a mass exodus from California for people moving to some other regions that I guess creates opportunity in some of those other regions as well. But with that said, anything else you want to add to what we covered today before we wrap it up?
Man, who knew that 2025 was going to start out like this? It's just wild times. Lots of good stuff to talk about. Very impactful. At the same time, there's a lot of disaster going on. There's a lot of stuff going on that seems problematic. But at the same time, in our business, it is going well, and it's easy to sell lots, and you can make money in the business right now. It's going to be a really good year, and a really good 4 years at least for the business that we're in. So a lot of positives, a lot of beautiful things going on at the same time.
Yep. Well, that is a wrap for this episode. A little longer than we normally do on these industry news episodes, but a lot to talk about there. Appreciate all of you, as always, tuning in, and we will talk to you all next week.
Bye-bye.